This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday Lunchtime Show. Thanks for joining me. Today my special guest is English teacher and teacher trainer Gerard McLaughlin. We'll be talking about raising awareness of inclusive practices in the classroom.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Sunday Lunchtime Show, everyone. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. As I mentioned earlier on today's show, I'll be talking about the importance of inclusion with Gerard McLaughlin. Gerard is a teacher and teacher trainer for both the certificate and diploma in teaching English to speakers of other languages. That's the CELTA and Delta at the School of Modern Languages at the University of Barcelona in Spain. He has a passion for raising awareness of inclusive practices in the classroom. And I'll be talking to Gerard about his work and about today's topic of inclusion after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for Bet UK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, Bet has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This week, the BBC reported concerns the national curriculum does not teach children enough about getting out of difficulty in open water. Gary Gentle, head teacher of Bilston Church of England Primary School, said there should be more emphasis on teaching water safety. While the national curriculum mandates that all schools must provide swimming instruction and that children must be able to swim proficiently over a distance of 25 metres, however, statistics gathered by Active Black Country showed 48% of primary school leavers, that's 7,884 children across the Black Country, were unable to demonstrate safe self-rescue. In another headline, teachers' working hours remain consistently high. The annual Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders research, which is published by the Department for Education, finds that Full-time leaders report working 58.2 hours a week, and full-time teachers reported working 52.4 hours a week, which is up from 51.9 the last time the study was conducted. Education Uncovered reported that the largest two schools within the Astria Academy Trust have seen the number of students staying on in the sixth form collapsing following the introduction of reduced subject options, strict behaviour regimes and centralised teaching. Long Sands and St Ivo Academies, both in Cambridgeshire, saw the number of students starting in the sixth form falling by a combined 40% from January 2019, in the year the Trust took them over, until January 24. Astria had implemented a number of changes on the basis of students' sixth form choices. While this may be the explanation for fewer students entering the sixth form, it seems clear that sixth form numbers have been on a downward trend since Astria arrived, and the Trust introduced tough new rules on behaviour, uniform and equipment following the arrival of Richard Tutt as Director of Secondary Education. Mr Tutt's leadership has also seen centralised teaching approaches put in place. Sky News reported that most teachers have seen pupils in dirty clothes with unwashed hair and unbrushed teeth in the past year. School staff reported personally washing pupils' uniforms and buying soap, toiletries and laundry detergent for families in need. And the majority of teachers have witnessed pupils attending school in dirty clothes. 4 in 5 school staff believe there's been an increase in hygiene poverty, and a third of these said the rise has been significant, according to a poll carried out by Census Wide in September. Almost all news outlets this week covered the fact that teachers in England have voted overwhelmingly to accept the pay rise offer. The NEU Snap poll showed 95% of members voting for the 5.5% pay rise, ending months of industrial action. And as the result was announced, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson launched the next pay round for 2025 to 2026 with a letter to the School Teachers Review Body asking for their recommendations at the earliest opportunity. In future, we may see the end of the old-style essay written on wobbly tables in exam rooms, since Cambridge International announced digital exams. 6 subjects will have digital exams from 2026. Cambridge International Education said the planned global rollout across full range of Cambridge curricula covering IGCSE, AS and A-level will begin in 2026. By 2033, Cambridge says 85% of all its high-stakes qualifications will have a digital option. Another possible insight into the future of education, not unrelated to digital exams, comes from The Atlantic magazine, which reports increasing evidence that college students arrive at higher education unable to read books. Students now seem bewildered by the thought of finishing multiple books in a semester, and one lecturer commented, "It's not that they don't want to do reading, it's not that they can't read, it's just that they don't know how to, and high schools have stopped expecting them to." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs.
Hello and welcome back, everybody. I am very happy to be here with Gerard McLaughlin. And Gerard, how are you?
I'm good. Actually, I'm having a bit of a holiday at the moment, so I'm actually doing this from Rome, which is great.
Fantastic. So, Gerard, and I usually start by talking to my guests about how they became teachers, how they got interested in education. What was it in your case?
I think I kind of fell into it. It wasn't something that I'd always wanted to do. What I'd always wanted to do was live abroad. Because when I was 11, I passed the 11 plus. And my parents said to me, you can have a bicycle, or your auntie and uncle are going to Italy on holiday, and you can go with them. So I chose the holiday to Italy. And that's when I realized that I didn't want to live in a grotty northwest England town that had chemical factories and see more of the world. So when I left college, I started working in a camping site in the north of Italy and started to ask people, what can I do? I want to stay. And they said, teach English. So I applied for a job and got it and started teaching English in a small town just south of Bologna.
Wow.
And it was just me and the owner of the school. It was a very small school. And it was a method school, so I was teaching the in lingua method. I knew no different, so I never did a CELTA as an initial teacher. But I enjoyed being in the classroom. Most people know me a lot by now, and I do talks and stuff, but when I was much younger, I was very shy. And I think the teaching helped me overcome that shyness and being able to talk to people and feel comfortable with them. Once I closed the door, I felt this is my world. And then I could see that people really wanted to learn English. And I thought, well, yeah, I can help you with that. And I think with the director of the school, she helped me develop as a teacher, and I stayed there for 3 years. So by that time, I decided to go back to the UK. And I spent about 3 or 4 years in the UK, then moved to the former Yugoslavia and taught there for a year. And unfortunately, I would have stayed, but the civil war started in what was the former Yugoslavia. So I was kind of forced to leave. I went back to the UK, did my diptepla, and then through working in a college in London, I decided I wanted to do teacher training. I'd had quite a lot of teaching experience by then, and I enjoyed being with the students. The students enjoyed being with me. So I was also doing something right, and I wanted to pass it on to other people. I wanted to help people realize their potential, especially in initial teacher training. It took me a while with the school I was working with to become a CELTA trainer. But I did that, I think it was about 1998. And after a couple of years, I did a talk at International House London on teacher training.
Yeah.
And there were some people there from IH Barcelona. And they said to me, we're always looking for trainers in the summer, so why don't you come? So I took a sabbatical from where I was working in London. And after about 10 days, I thought, this is it. I found the place I want to live in. I found my soul. And I was started in 2001. And I think because of the reputation IH Barcelona had, that's when I really developed as a CELTA trainer. Very much so at the beginning, there was a lot of work with TBLT in teacher training. So that was really good. And I became a CELTA assessor through that as well. And then I think it was after about 7 or 8 years, I asked to become a Delta trainer. Then it was like helping experienced teachers. And I learned to kind of say in Delta interviews, you know that I'm going to have to deconstruct you to reconstruct you. Because we all kind of get into bad habits, but I can make you into an even better and more effective teacher. And so I've been doing that, both CELTA and Delta training in Barcelona. More recently, because of the kind of fall of International House Barcelona, I've moved to the University of Barcelona. I'm working at the School of Modern Languages and helped them set up the whole program. So that's where I am at the moment, doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do you find working for the university rather than International House, the Language Academy? What's the difference, do you think, the main difference between those two?
I think the main difference is the kind of financial side of it. It's not a business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So International House is more like, we have to have numbers, we have to have numbers, we have to have numbers. Whereas at the university, it's just breaking even. They're not there to make a profit. It's there to kind of provide something that's kind of creme de la creme that helps the university's program in all different things, but it's not a money-making thing. It's a professional development. So I think for me, that's the biggest difference. Otherwise, the programs are exactly the same, but it's this aspect of the money's not the most important thing. As long as we're breaking even, that's the important thing.
And how do you feel teacher development? I mean, this is a very big question. I don't want to get into too many details because I want to move on to what you suggested we should be talking about. But how do you feel teacher development has changed? Has the focus changed over the last, since the pandemic, for example? Do teachers need other things, or is it pretty much the same as it was before the pandemic?
I think it's pretty much the same. The only difference is the teaching online. During the pandemic, we were doing the CELTA courses online. And so, of course, those trainees who learned how to do the CELTA program only taught online, so they didn't have experience of teaching face-to-face. And now we're back to doing face-to-face. We always have a session or even two sessions on how to teach online. So it's combining the two. I think that's the big difference, is this kind of using the digital platforms to teach more. But I don't think the content has changed that much, but raising people's awareness of the fact that, online teaching is a big thing at the moment. And that's where there is a lot of work. And so it's helping them with those tools when they're just doing a face-to-face program. I suppose in terms of Delta, the biggest thing that's happening, I suppose, is this idea of emergent language, and raising trainee teachers' awareness of listening to the students, what they're saying. And one of the criteria in the Cambridge assessment thing for Delta is judiciously exploiting learner output. So it's listening to them and thinking, well, that's worth exploiting, that's not worth exploiting. And sometimes that's hard to learn what's worth and what's not worth.
So helping teachers understand what is important when emergent language happens in the classroom.
And exploiting it, not just doing it and then moving on. It's like providing a mini speaking activity, so they're getting a bit of practice of that language, if that. So
of course, so having strategies or ideas of how you can actually make the most of what the learners say.
And that's an input session on the Delta course, and then we're focusing on feedback after their lessons as well. So that's an interesting thing to be focusing on.
Definitely. And so Gerard, one of the things you said you wanted to focus on, which I thought we could make the main topic of today's conversation, is this idea of inclusive practices and SEND, special educational needs and disability. And I'd love to hear about how you became particularly interested in the idea of inclusion or SEND in teacher education.
I think it started because I was doing lots of talks at conferences, and I was doing things like how to teach vocabulary, how to teach speaking, all the different skills, all the different systems. But I wasn't thinking of anything new. It was just regurgitating the same old ideas. And then I remember once I was reading the El País Sunday magazine, and there was an article there on young people in Iran. And it said that one of the big things that struck me about it was that 70% of the population in Iran are under 30.
Wow.
And there is the kind of system, the politics in the country doesn't allow them to express themselves. So in particular, there were 3 different people who were talking about how they were wanting to fly and spread their wings and do what they wanted to do, but they would have to leave the country to do that. And I thought, oh, it's like as a teacher, you read things or you watch a little video and you think, oh, I can use that in class. And so I started using that as to kind of raise my students' awareness of the kind of difficulties other people go through in situations that we have no experience of. And so that was my first idea of kind of raising awareness and kind of changing perspectives. Because sometimes we know about these things, but unless they're quite kind of brought to our attention, we talk about it, but we don't really know about it. And so I thought I can exploit this material in the classroom, at the same time get people talking about something that's different from whatever's in the course book. Because that was another thing I always thought about, is the issues that I then started to focus on were very rarely in course books. They didn't come into the standard topics that are in course books. And I suppose then from the thing with the people in Iran, I took a personal aspect of dealing with color blindness. Because I myself am colorblind. And so it doesn't really affect me that much. But I looked into it and I found somebody who is totally colorblind, a person called Neil Harbison. And he actually is from Mataró in Spain, in Barcelona. And I kind of found videos about him and found out that he was interested in learning to hear color. He was an artist and a musician. And so he saw somebody at his university in the UK talking about this program that could transform sight into sound. So he approached him, and this guy set up this program whereby he had a camera on the front of his head, and the camera would focus on a color and he would hear a musical note.
Oh, wow.
And so from then he learned the first 30 musical notes. So he knew 30 colors. And now he can recognize all colors. So he...
But he's, when you say you can recognize the colors, only with the camera on his head, or is it actually now he's related what he can see to the actual color?
No, it's with the camera. He's now he got in touch with a doctor from Slovenia and a doctor from Barcelona as well, to have an electronic chip inserted in the front of his head. So he no longer has the camera. The camera is there a little bit, but there's an electronic chip at the back of his head, so he doesn't need to be carrying around a laptop. So as he says, he hears color all the time. And because he's hearing it, he can visualize it, but he can't actually see it. So, and I thought that, wow, that's an amazing way to change your perspective. So I use that as well as with my students, is imagine if all you saw was black and white, which is what he sees. But, he's an artist, and he set up a cyborg foundation in Mataró to kind of use this with people who have other sight problems. So he's helping even blind people and deaf people with this kind of electronic chip that he's got himself. And so it was like kind of, one of the things I always think about is the word disability is so negatively charged.
Yeah.
It's a word I use, but I don't like using it. And I kind of always say, I think everyone has an ability. Nobody has a disability. It's learning what everyone's ability is and homing in on that. And so I think from those two things, I've kind of developed into looking at other people who have a disability, but have surely turned it into something that they can focus on and work with.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting approach, isn't it? I think a few years ago we were looking at trying to help remote teachers with students who had special educational needs or disabilities, and we commissioned some research, and with the idea of trying to provide support or resources for teachers who are teaching online, because it seemed to be an area which wasn't really catered for. There wasn't a lot of specific focus on, if you're teaching online, how do you help? And the consultants that we that ended up doing the work, they suggested, rather than look at SEND, to actually look at how online teaching in general could just be made more inclusive. So rather than focusing on particular disabilities, what can teachers do just to give whatever special needs or support a student needs? It doesn't really matter if teachers have an awareness of trying to make it multimodal, differentiate, and to make the classroom environment more inclusive, which I thought was a really interesting approach. Then you don't focus on the kind of that negative idea of, I've got one student who is disabled in my classroom, etc., which is
yeah. I think it has. It's kind of changed teachers' perspectives of dealing with different media in different ways that applies to everybody. As you're saying, it's not singling somebody out. This is the special bit for the person who's deaf or the person who's blind. But different media are being used so that at different moments in the class, everybody's involved and is able to contribute.
And even, it used to be said that if you're presenting with PowerPoint and you have words on a slide, you shouldn't read them out. But actually, if you read them, then that gives the students, for example, or teachers, if you're presenting, the option to actually listen to you rather than read, and that might be more beneficial to them.
There's another thing I learned, because when it was in the pandemic as well, I signed up to Future Learn, and I did one of the courses on dyslexia. Woman from the University of Lancaster, her name escapes me at the moment. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. But one of the things I learned from that as well is that with people with dyslexia, using black and white on a PowerPoint doesn't help them. So it's to have a kind of soft pastel color as the background, because the black and white, it affects the perception of the text. So if you use a soft blue or a soft green, the text stands out a little bit more. And it's a simple thing. It doesn't really affect anybody else, but it is helping people who suffer from dyslexia. There was a very good course. Name's just come to me, Judith Kormos at the University of Lexis. But again, I think if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about other little things I've focused on that have kind of brought people's awareness of things like people who are blind, totally blind, or people in a wheelchair. I remember, again, don't know about you as a teacher, but I'm reading newspaper articles or I'm watching little videos and thinking, and I was watching ads on Spanish television, and there was a great ad for Volkswagen television. And then it came up that it won an award, and it had been done by a blind photographer. Called Pete Eckert. And so I wrote down his name, and he has his own website, and I found a video where he talks about how he wasn't born blind, but he became blind. And so he doesn't see visual side, but he hears crackling and he has like lightning in front of his eye. And he uses that to produce his photography. And he takes his photographs at night because, as he says, as a blind person, everything is dark. So I associate night time as the best time I can take a photograph. Another cute thing that he says, that he sees the world in 360 degrees.
Really? Amazing.
Yeah, so there's all these interesting facts that are in this video, and when I show it to students, they're like, wow. You know, it's like, you thought, what is it like to be blind? Or what is it like to be in a wheelchair and move around your town or around your city? And so what I've done with students then is maybe like a little project, you know, in your area, what is there? What facilities are there for people who are blind or in a wheelchair? And it makes people notice things more and maybe help people who are blind or in a wheelchair.
Yeah. That's one of the interesting things about teaching a language, teaching English, isn't it? Is that you can adapt the content. I think, I don't know who said it, but the idea of a language or English is a subject in need of content, or, you can decide what the content is to a large extent based on the needs of the learners. So this idea of focusing more upon inclusion or raising awareness of these social kind of needs is a really good idea.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think it is. It's like people know about it, but they've not really experienced it, or so it's involving them, and it's doing something different. That's the normal thing in the coast sport. Talking about your holiday, talking about an adventure. It's looking at the world that's around you and making you more aware of people who have an ability. Every time you watch the Olympics and there's the Paralympics, you think, wow, things these people do, even though they haven't got both legs or they've only got one arm, but the power that they have to be able to achieve what they want to is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is definitely. And how have the students, what age group are the students?
But I've done it mainly with 12 to 18-year-olds and adults.
Yeah. And how have they reacted to this introduction of these topics and themes to class? Has it sort of inspired them? Have they reacted positively? Have they gone out and done anything as a result that you know of?
Yes. For example, with the blind and the person in the wheelchair, they did do projects, and they came back and found out, did a little project of what happens on the buses, what happens in the crossing the road. Because sometimes when the traffic lights go, there's a noise, which is for blind people to let them know that it's okay for them to cross. But in some cities, it's not like that. And in Barcelona, it's not like that.
Yeah.
But occasionally it does work. So one of them had found a blind person who was crossing the street and it made the noise. So he went up to them and asked, how does that work? And he said, I've got a little button on my cane and I can activate it through this little button. And so I was like, so they got more involved in finding out more about it, which I thought was good. Especially, I would say that it's more the younger learners and those kind of things. They enjoyed doing the project work with it. The older, the kind of adult learners, not so much, probably because they were working and didn't have the time to get together and do a project. But I think the kind of teenagers and younger adults were quite keen on doing a little project work and bringing it to class and sharing what they found out with each other.
Right. And have you ever had the experience of having students in your classroom that had particular needs that you needed to cater for? Or
Yes, I've had a student who was in a wheelchair.
Mhm.
Um, and so actually before I did that lesson on the wheelchair, I did ask him, would it be okay if I did this? And he was like, oh, sure, 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 sure. I mean, the students are always very kind with him,
Mhm.
very helpful. Because it was the time when I was working at International House Barcelona and we didn't have a lift. So he always had to have a classroom that was on the ground floor, but the cafe was up on the second floor. So, you know, they very happily go up in the break, go up and get him a coffee, bring him down a snack. But it did also kind of get them to think about, what he copes with every day. But it wasn't an issue for him. That was the good thing. It was like, this is my life and I get on with it. It's what I do. Um, I haven't had experience of a student who's blind. I've helped people do applications because they're blind, but not in a classroom. Not
Mhm.
in a classroom.
Mhm. And
Um,
what about as a teacher trainer? Have you had other teachers who have had disabilities or special educational needs?
no, no. Mainly, perhaps things like dyslexia, those kind of things. And so it's the only thing I can do is give them more time and support to be able to produce their work, and sit down with them and help them understand what they have to do. Uh, but no, I've not had anyone with a kind of physical disability in my teacher training. No, no.
Yeah. Interesting enough, the last IATEFL conference that I went to, from Brazil, we took a teacher who was visually impaired um,
Hmm.
over to that, and she gave a presentation about working as a teacher, as a visually impaired teacher, which was
Hmm.
fascinating. But also, she attended a lot of the conference sessions, and it was interesting. I didn't spend a lot of time with her, but I did talk to her about the experience. But one of my colleagues from Brazil accompanied her to all of the sessions and got a real different awareness of what it is like to attend a conference if you're in that kind of situation,
Hmm.
and comments about a lot of the presentations not really being very accessible to her and things like that.
And probably lots of words on the screen that she couldn't read, or the font
Yeah,
was too
that weren't
small,
read
that kind.
out, or things
Hmm.
like things that there were a couple of sessions that used these kind of external polling that takes place on mobile devices because it's a
Hmm.
great way. I've always thought it's a great way of actually making your session more interactive, getting the audience to respond. And
Hmm.
but she couldn't use any of those, and um,
Yeah,
just sharing it through a QR code, which she couldn't kind of access, was problematic and things like that. So it was really good food for thought, and we have asked her to maybe write something up for the IATEFL journal to actually share with potential
that's
presenters.
great. Because it's something I suppose that a lot of presenters don't think about.
Yeah, you only think about things like that, and if you are made aware of it, I think. So that
Hmm.
idea of what you said is saying with your students to raise awareness is so important, isn't it? Of like,
Hmm.
not everybody sees the world, hears the world, experiences the world the way that you do, and
No.
having to think about that is always a good thing.
Mm. Yeah, 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 definitely. And the more aware you are, the more careful you are in the way you're doing things. Because you
Yeah.
were talking about reading things aloud. I know in a presentation, sometimes I'm thinking, why are you reading it aloud when I can actually see it? And then your point just now is thinking, now I get what you mean.
Yeah, I only started thinking about that actually because of what she said.
Mhm.
Is prior to that, I'd always like, if you put words on a screen, it seems like, it defeats the object if you read those words out. Or worse, if you say something different while asking the participants in the presentation to read the words, because people can't listen to you and read the words and take in
No.
those two at the same time. So either
Yeah.
let them read the words or you read the actual words out on the screen for them, which I
Mm.
think now I understand that is actually better. And I always thought that wasn't good practice, but now I realize I was completely wrong.
Exactly. You just made me realize that now as well.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny.
Mm.
So, Gerard,
Um,
one of the
yeah.
other things you said you were interested in talking about and that you feel very strongly about is this idea of championing women.
Hmm.
Um, would you like to talk about a little bit about I think it's obvious why that is important, but if you want to expand upon how you feel
How we
about
came
this would
across
be
that
good.
and how I feel about it. Yeah, I mean, I think in society, women are the stronger element anyway.
Mm,
Women are the ones who hold society together. Um, and through long time ago, I worked at a UN agency here in Rome, long time ago. And so I've always been interested in UN agencies. And so when it was called Twitter, I joined Twitter, and one of the ones I joined was UN Women. And for any teacher out there, I think I use UN Women, UNHCR, and another one called Free and Equal, and they have great educational videos on there. And so I was following little tweets and stuff on UN Women, and then this video popped up. And the video is just a visual thing with words. There's no voice. And it talks about the great things women have achieved since the 1800s, from getting the vote to flying across the Atlantic to being the women in space. And it is very simple, but it makes people aware that women have done an awful lot, but it's not often been talked about. And I think it's something I used to do typically on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, but then I think it should be done all the time. It shouldn't just be done once a year. It should be done throughout the year.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at places like the BBC and the Guardian around International Women's Day as well, they have many articles that I've used throughout the year, again, to raise awareness of the great things women have contributed to in society, but also sometimes things that they haven't been successful with. I remember one of the things in this short article they had on the BBC, one of the things that women had done. And one woman in the early 1900s had invented the windscreen wiper. So before the windscreen wiper was invented, people used to stop when it was raining, get out the car, wipe the screen, get back in and drive a little bit more. And she came up with the idea, and she took it to a motor company, and they rejected it because she was a woman.
Right.
And about 3 or 4 years later, a man came up with the idea, and it was accepted, and it became what we have today. Yeah. And it's like,
yeah.
I think
one of the books I read recently about AI, which was actually published before this big explosion of generative AI, which I think it was called 9 Bytes, Bytes as in BYTES, by Janet Winterson. And she looked at the whole area of computing, including AI, but also other aspects of computing. And from a kind of a woman's point of view, a perspective of of looking at the kind of male bias that exists in things, as we know, more and more of artificial intelligence, etc., but also of some of the pioneers when it came to computer science that were women and that have been kind of written out of history and stuff like that. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, and that was one of the things in that article in the BBC actually.
Yeah, and one of the things that always comes up is the idea of science fiction as a genre of writing. It's basically invented by Mary Shelley, but so many people, when they talk about science fiction, they mention H.G. Wells, for example. He was only a child when Mary Shelley was writing science fiction.
Yeah, and then you've got George Eliot as well. So at a time when the only way she could publish was by using a male name. Hopefully, we've become a lot more aware of women's roles, and it's getting a lot better. But I still think there's a lot more to do, and it's worth talking about in the classroom.
Yeah. So you bring this up in the classroom with students, but also from a perspective of a teacher trainer as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there anything in the actual syllabus of some of the teacher training courses that you do, or is it that additional to that?
No, it's not in the syllabus. There's something I do. Because even if I think about it, most of the trainees on both CELTA and Delta, the majority are women. If you look in ELT in general, there's a greater number of female teachers than male teachers.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
There are two other things that I really did want to talk about connected to the UN agencies as well, and the work of the UNHCR, which I think as well at the moment is a big issue, the idea of immigration and lots of people coming into a country. And again, there was a very powerful video that I found called Dream Diaries, which looked at about 6 or 7 people between the age of 10 and 18 who had left their country and were now living in Europe. And they talked about their hopes and dreams. And it's very beautifully done. They talk in the language of the country they've moved to, but there are subtitles in English. So some of them moved to Germany, and some of them moved to France, some of them moved to Belgium. But the amazing thing that they do is they all want to go back to their country and rebuild it and help people in their country. Particularly the one that stands out is an Afghan girl who wants to go and set up a school for girls. because they're not included in education. There's a bit in the middle which is a bit strong because they talk about when they had to leave their country and how difficult that was. And so more recently, I've stopped using that middle bit and said to people, if you want to watch this at home, because it is a tearjerker. The number of times I've watched it, I still well up a little bit when I listen to the suffering that they had. So there's a lot of educational videos on the UNHCR website as well. And the other thing I do is, because each UN agency has an ambassador, and the ambassador are usually famous people, and so it's like, in the class, who is your kind of idol? Now go on to the UN website and find out if they're an ambassador for a UN agency. What does that agency do? What do they do to, most of musicians, actors, writers are somehow involved with a UN agency as an ambassador. They have these idols that they adore, but they're also out there helping people who are perhaps disadvantaged in different ways around the world. So also gets them to realize that there are people who are disadvantaged wherever they're living. So
no, that's really good.
There is the last one again, which is another UN agency, which is called Free and Equal, which looks at LGBTQI, and it's a cartoon, and again it's just visual. There's no voice. And it's a boy and a girl who are playing football, and the mother's watching. And then the mother notices something, that the girl has a friend who comes along and gives her a kiss and walks away. So she comes out and tells the boy to get inside, and then they shut the door in this girl's face. Then it moves on. A couple of days later, the girl is out walking in the park, and there's a group of young people, this boy included, who are throwing rocks at her. And the mother notices again. She goes out and stops them. And then he goes and apologizes. And it kind of raises this issue of lots of young people are bullied because of their gender.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the message of the video. But behind it as well is the kind of idea that the kind of negativity comes from the mother and not from the boy.
Right.
So sometimes it's
that's learned for me as negativity, or the this idea of bullying doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It kind of comes with especially if you're a child, you kind of you learn it from someone or somewhere.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so then what I get the students to do is maybe write a summary of it from the girl's perspective, the mother's perspective, or the boy's perspective, just to kind of put yourself in their shoes and what do you think they were thinking when everything was happening. So it's amazing how you can, the video clip's like a minute and a half. It's not very long, but there are so many things you can exploit it for.
Yes, and that's one of the areas. So that's a nice segue into one of the other areas that you said you're particularly interested in, is this idea of using video to develop listening and language. So this is an idea of how you can take a very short video and about a subject that is very important at the moment. Well, several subjects really, including the kind of, an awareness of bullying and the damage that can do, and turn it into a classroom activity. Is it that you think video in particular is a very important, powerful tool to use for language learning? Or is it just something that you've come across and have ended up collecting a lot of video resources that you have then worked into your classrooms?
No. Actually, what happened was I was working in London. I had FCE classes, and they were all struggling with listening.
Yeah.
And I just finished my dip. And so I went to my tutor and I said, they're struggling with listening. I don't know what to do. He said, why don't you ask them how they feel about listening? And so I did that. I just asked them to write 50 words on how they think, and they could write it in whatever way they wanted. I didn't want to say, what do you find difficult? What do you find easy? I just said, how do you feel about listening? So in a way, it was kind of an action research project. But one of the big things that came out of it was that they said it was that when they're listening, at the time it was listening to the tape, we can't see the person. So we can't see their body language, we can't see their face. And so that the idea of sight and sound was also important to them. And that's where from then, this was in the 90s, I started to use videos more because I think they're much more powerful, because generally when we're listening, we've got the person in front of us and we can see and get the energy from them. And I think the same is true of a of a video. I don't want to discount that we use tracks from a course book, but I think if we want to train and develop listening, video is a great resource. And that's the big thing for me, is like a lot of the time when we're doing listening in the classroom, we're perhaps testing it rather than developing it. And so finding out what the problem is, and then using this idea of decoding and rewinding sections that the students have not caught because of rapid speech, speaking very quickly, features of connected speech, working with that when you're developing listening. So I do a lot of that with any of the DVDs that I've been using and the tracks that I use from CDs and course book. If there's a certain phrase that they don't get, is replaying it and replaying it again, and doing like a gap fill on the board, and building it up with the words the students can hear, play it again, now focus on those two words that you can't get. And it tends to be the connected speech features. And so it's the work that's been looked at by John Field and Caldwell, and even Sheila Thorne at the moment is working with these features of connected speech. So that's quite a big important thing that I think is to exploit a video, but even listening and develop listening helps students because of the rapid speech that we have in English, which is different to most other languages. And going back to your other question, is like activities to do with it. I mean, that thing of writing things from the people's perspective is good. A lot of the videos as well, particularly with the one with the dream diaries, I said to them, okay, imagine you'd seen this online and you wanted to write a comment. People write comments on things online all the time. We're not going to do this in a public domain. We're just going to do it on a Google Doc. So I set up a Google Doc. I put in the link of the video so they could watch it again, and they could just write their own comments with their name. And so they learned then how to express themselves as a response to what they'd seen. But also in some videos, they use useful language. Again, going back to that dream diaries, because they were talking about their hopes and dreams, there were phrases like, I would like, I wish people would. And so I took those sentence frames and got the students then to write their own sentences, share it, and write a summary of what they'd learned from their colleagues, again, using Google Doc in the classroom. And so I think apart from developing the listening, the vocab content and the language content of videos can be exploited in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's also a great way of motivating students as well, isn't it? Because if you're using videos that contain content that they're particularly interested in, then that means it's more relevant to them than anything you could find in a course book.
Yeah,
usually. And also authentic language, as you say, connected speech, authentic language is so important for students to have exposure to that.
Yeah. No, they really appreciate it. They really appreciate it. And I think of the videos I've mentioned, some of them can be used even with the kind of A2, B1, especially ones that don't have a voice. Others, maybe because of the level of the language, are better at B2 or C1 level.
How do you see things changing, for example, in the world of teaching of English or teacher education? Have you noticed anything that is affecting the way that you teach the language, or the way that teachers are teaching the language, with looking at the teachers that you're training? Are there things that have recently come to the fore that you think is changing the way people approach language teaching and learning?
Yes, there are two big things for me at the moment.
Sure.
I think coming out of Michael Lewis's work, the lexical approach, and dealing with collocation, and the work by Hugh Deller and Andrew Walkley, who have the lexical lab, is working with language as chunks and not seeing it as individual words, and helping students with the fixed item and the variable items that can go with a particular item of vocabulary. And that's also coming into the work of the emergent language, which is the kind of thing that Danny Norrington-Davis and Richard Chin are working with. And kind of related to that is, again, going back to Danny Norrington-Davis, the idea of rules to reason when teaching grammar. Not teaching grammar rules. The students have done it so many times, they know the rules, they can match rules to example. But asking them, why did that person say that? Getting them to be more cognitively involved in understanding why they said that in that particular context helps them understand that language is flexible. It changes from the context. But it also helps it become more memorable in a way, I think, because they are more cognitively involved. And the same with the kind of lexical approach and looking at collocation. It's getting the students to use their brain more rather than doing the rote learning, which is the kind of matching rules to samples, which, if I think about it, was the way I started teaching was rote learning. It was, I say this, you repeat. I say this, you repeat. When I look back at it, I think, my God, what was I doing? But I didn't know anything different. But
Yeah.
I've certain data developed in my career, and I continue developing. I think it's the beauty of language teaching for me. We never stop learning.
Yeah, I think it's necessary. You can't say, okay, I know how to teach now. That's me. I'll do that. I'll teach in that way for the next 20 years. It's the idea of, as we find out more about teaching and learning and what works and what doesn't work, it's adapting practices and stuff. I think the worst thing you can do as a teacher is to kind of not develop, I think, not to continue learning. And there's so many ways you can do that. You can take a course, you could take a certificate course or, diploma of the such, or just talk to other teachers very informally. You find out what is happening or read.
And be eclectic.
Yeah.
There's always a quote by Henry Whittinson that I always liked. It was like, if you tell me you're eclectic, I'm ad-libbing here. It's like, if you tell me you're eclectic, but you don't know the principles behind your eclecticism, you're not eclectic, you're merely confused.
Okay, that's interesting. So definitely the idea of not just teaching chaotically, if you like, which, eclectic doesn't mean not having any principled or structured approach to your teaching, but actually selecting from things methodologies and approaches that That's the eclectic approach that you think.
And knowing the students and what will work for them as well, because it's not just what works for you, it's what works for the student.
Of course. I always remember a private student that I had when I worked in Barcelona, and she insisted on understanding every single word and knowing what it meant in Spanish. And I kind of tried to dissuade her. Like, you don't need to. But she needed it. It's almost, after fruitlessly trying to have her change the way she approached the learning of the language, I kind of accepted that this was a need that she had. So even though I thought it probably wasn't the most effective way of her learning, she was so sort of convinced and think that had worked for her when she learned French, that when it approached English, she needed that as well.
Yeah, it's like some people know how they learn better. I mean, I think I don't, like myself, when I go to language classes now, because I do sometimes, and sometimes I say to them, oh, please don't let me to do this. It doesn't work for me.
That's interesting, isn't it? That's so do you speak up and tell the teacher that, or
no,
it's a
I
very
don't
difficult thing
them.
for a student to do, isn't it? It's like, teacher, can we do something a bit different? Plus, also, if you're in a class, it might work for the majority.
And it usually does. It usually does.
So what kind of things do you know don't work for you, or that you don't particularly like doing in a language class as a student?
Like in Spanish, at the beginning of the class, we'd be told the infinitive of a verb, and then we'd have to decline it in a particular tense. I didn't know the names of the tenses.
Right.
And then I would think, I don't use all of the pronouns. The majority of it is I, he, she, we, and maybe the you.
Yeah.
But it's not going to help me communicate if I can say, I go, you go, he, she, it goes, we go, you go, they go. Yeah, I can mechanically say it, but then when it comes to putting it into a sentence, I'm searching for it.
Yeah.
Until I get to the they go, I've had to go through the I go to they go. It drives me up the wall, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But, in the class, the other students were doing it, and they loved it. But also, it was like, I can't even remember the names of the tenses, like the past perfect, and I was thinking, what is the pluscuamperfecto tenso? I don't even know what that one is.
Yeah. I've spoken Spanish for many years and taken many classes and stuff. I still struggle with pronouns, and I never really understood or mastered the subjunctive tenses, so I tend to avoid it, etc. What I found recently is something I always knew, but one thing is knowing it and another thing is doing it, is reading.
Mhm.
So I've started reading again in Spanish, a lot of short stories in particular, and I'm really pleased just how easily I can read in Spanish now. And I'm also, apart from I'm just reading for enjoyment, but
Exactly.
I'm also spotting examples of language that kind of jump out of me at the page. It's like, all right, I never say that, or how is that constructed and stuff. So reflecting on individual sentences or constructions,
Yeah.
it's just come out. They just jump out of the page. Not all the time because I'm reading for the story, for example. But it's such a great way of becoming familiar with how people put language together. I think reading.
Yeah, the idea of noticing, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
you're reading for pleasure, and sometimes as a word comes up, and I just skip. I read in Spanish as well, but it can also happen in English. It's like, but I don't block. There's something else you just said now recently. Oh, by the subjunctive, because I remember because my Italian is much better than my Spanish, and I learned
Why is that, Gerard? Because you spent more time in Spain.
I
Is it
came
because
here
you
when I
learned?
was 11. I came
Right.
here when I was
Okay.
11. And the family that my cousin married into, none of them spoke English. So I was playing with the kids and they were speaking to me in Italian and I was learning from them. And then with my cousin's children, the same thing. So I'd come here to Rome maybe 3 or 4 times a year. It's like my second home.
Right. Okay.
And
That
I'd
makes sense
done
then.
that until I was in my 30s. So but in Rome, they don't use the subjunctive as much. And so when I went to work in the north, I heard these different verbs and I was curious, but I taught myself. I noticed it and then I taught myself. And also, I think because it's a concept we don't have. And I think those are the hardest things to acquire in another language is when the concept is completely different.
Yeah.
It does exist, but we don't use a different structure for it.
Yeah. Or if you can think of another way of saying it and avoiding using
Yes.
it, and you think, well, people understand me, but actually, perhaps you're never quite sure of what they think of you when you say it. If you're saying it in an awkward or clumsy way,
Yeah. And it comes back to the idea of chunking and collocation. Is a lot of the time I learned it as a chunk as well. I knew if I said I hope or I think, I had to follow it with a subjunctive. And so I learned it as a chunk then.
Gerard, just one last topic that you suggested I'd like to maybe explore just a little bit if you have time, which is this idea of mental health and burnout. And it's a topic that I think came particularly, I don't know if you agree with me, to the fore during the pandemic, this idea of well-being and mental health issues, that there was incredible strain put upon not only students but teachers. And this is something I know that you're particularly interested in and concerned about. Is that the case?
It is, but I think what I was more focusing on was kind of raising awareness of people who have mental health issues rather than mental health. I mean, for me, that side of it is a work in progress.
Right.
I know, for example, Sarah Mercer is a big person who's up on the teachers' well-being and the students' well-being, but it's more to do with raising awareness of people who are autistic or who have Tourette's syndrome. That's another area that I focus on with the videos that I use in the classroom, rather than teachers' well-being. That's not something that I'm that much up on.
Right.
It's a work in progress for me, that kind of thing.
And have you had students or teachers in your classroom that have had Tourette's or have autism, etc.?
No,
No.
I haven't actually had. With Tourette's a little bit. It's kind of little tics that students have, but it's not, because it's like anything that people are on the spectrum, and so it's like making little noises, but nothing extreme. No, not in my experience. Things that I've watched online, and yes, there have been some people with quite serious Tourette's. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of the program. There was a program on British TV which was trying to find work with people who had mental health issues. One of the guys had very serious Tourette's, to the sense that he would swear every 3 or 4 words was a swear word. And so the person who was trying to help him find work noticed that he took very good photographs.
Right.
And so he doesn't need to speak when he's doing that. And he's actually now I follow him on Twitter and on Instagram, and he's an excellent photographer. There's another guy who was autistic, and the people in the company didn't know how to deal with him because he would be away from them all the time. And so they encouraged the people in the workplace to just smile and say hello and sit down with him, but don't put any pressure on him. Just let him listen, and he didn't have to join in the conversation. And at the end of it, he kind of finished his training period, and he actually got up and gave a little speech himself for about 3 minutes. And all the other employees in the company were in tears because they'd never heard him speak, and he spoke from the heart about how the experience had helped him grow as a person. And at the end of it, the company gave him a job because he was very good. He was very good with computers. He knew how programs. They would say to him, "We need this to deliver." In 10 minutes, he'd worked it all out and showed them how to do it. And so it's finding people's potential, So it's that side of it that I'm more interested in than the well-being side of it. Sorry if I misled you with my description of that.
It's such a huge area that it's good to have that. And is it again through video that you introduce this to classes or to teachers to raise awareness of it?
Yeah.
And what kind of things do you ask the students or the teachers to do to reflect upon this?
How would you feel if you knew somebody who had this particular mental health issue, and what could you do to help them? And that tends to help them reflect and think about what it's like to have a kind of mental health issue that if you don't know anybody who's had it and you don't know how to deal with it, and then you do go somewhere where you might meet somebody who has that, then perhaps you're much more ready to kind of cope and help the person. Because I do remember in Barcelona, I had a trainee on a CELTA course who was, before she joined it, she was a psychiatric nurse. And after a number of years, she kind of thought, maybe I could combine the two. So she approached the Generalitat in Barcelona and said, I could teach English to people with mental health issues. And they helped her set up a foundation, and she worked with different hospitals in Barcelona, particularly with people with schizophrenia who wanted to learn English. And so she was trying, because she had experience of dealing with people as a psychiatric nurse. But she also had the skills of teaching them English. I think now she's no longer in Barcelona. I think she was running it for about 5 or 6 years. But it was quite a little successful project that she ran in Barcelona, helping people not only with schizophrenia, but with other mental health issues.
Yeah, it sounds like there must be a need for that. And people with her background and experience who can combine both are in the best position to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's like in CELTA courses, if someone's got business experience or marketing experience, maybe they can go into that area. So for a psychiatric nurse, then why not take advantage of that as well?
Definitely. Okay, so Gerard, I'm going to wrap things up now.
Okay.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention?
I don't think so. I think I've done everything that I made my notes on. Maybe one of the other things is maybe if you look at the IATEFL organization and the special interest group, if you're interested in these kind of things, have a look at the IPSEN. It's the Inclusive Practices Special Education Needs Special Interest Group. It's a very active special interest group, and they do lots of regional events in different countries, lots of webinars.
We're both great supporters and great fans of teaching associations, I think. The idea of joining a kind of formal organization such as IATEFL or TESOL Spain, etc., is a great way of focusing professional development. And you find people who are particularly interested in those special interests in these groups, don't you? Which is always a great thing to do.
Yeah, I'm probably following on social media as well, like on.
Oh yes, so much
Instagram
informal. I think there's so much informal professional development you can do now as a teacher online, in Facebook groups and Twitter X before,
and LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn, etc. WhatsApp groups. There are all sorts of things you can do. Having said that, I still think that I'm a great fan of formal teacher associations. I think there are certain things you can get from being actively involved in them that you can't get elsewhere. Okay, Jared, well, thank you so much for your time.
My
it's been
pleasure.
a pleasure talking to you about quite a wide range of different things and hearing about your experience as a teacher and teacher trainer. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. I've enjoyed it as well, Graham. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for Bet UK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, Bet has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
Thanks so much to Gerard for joining me as my guest. I now have Phil Longwell on the line, who has been listening to the show. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Graham. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Phil. So, Phil, is there anything that Gerard talked about that is particularly caught your attention that you'd like to comment upon or expand upon?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. I mean, I remember going to a conference in Malta, ELT Malta, in I think it's 2017 or maybe 2018, and Gerard was speaking. And
right.
I think that thing he talked about with disability, he educated me somewhat in terms of redefine disability. And I can't remember the actual quote, but he mentioned it earlier about redefining people as not being disabled or able-bodied and looking at the language involved around disability and inclusion. So that was an interesting thing that that was the very first time I ever met and heard Gerald speak, actually, which is why I listened in today. And Gerald's been very supportive of me in the things that I've been doing in terms of mental health, burnout, you mentioned towards the end of the interview there as well. So yeah, a lot of things sort of made my ears prick up and made me listen quite intensely there.
Great. So, Phil, I didn't realize you knew Gerard. So you knew from the Malta conference. That's interesting. And you mentioned burnout. Is there? We didn't really get to speak a lot about burnout, Gerard and I, but that's something that is a particular concern of yours, I think. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I have presented at conferences going back a few years now. I haven't done much recently in terms of presenting, but burnout, mental health. I mean, the issue of mental health, ELT, was something that I wanted to
Yeah,
explore. Gerard quite rightly pointed out that Sarah Mercer's done a lot in terms of well-being and gave the IATEFL plenary in 2017 in Glasgow, which I remember. And that was what inspired me to do my own research into mental health back in 2017, 2018, which I presented in Brighton. And of course, the last time we met, Graham, was in Brighton this year.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
and so things came full circle. So it was quite, serendipitous. And yeah, burnout. A lot of teachers. For some reason, I always think Brazilian teachers. For some reason, I know a lot of Brazilian teachers, as you do, teachers that have experienced burnout because they're under a lot of stress. It would seem in their classrooms, constantly having to do work, lots of students to cater for, lots of travelling. We're doing just, and I just thought the issue of burnout was just one part of many aspects of the mental health of language teachers, which kind of inspired me to, as well as Sarah Mercer's plenary, as I mentioned, to research it and write about it and present about it.
Yes. In your experience, what are the main causes of burnout or mental health issues with teachers? Is it overwork, large classes, the kind of things that we assume would be the case, or are there other factors as well that are important?
Well, it starts with contracts. It starts with the number of hours language teachers, especially, are expected to teach and to be engaged with the students on. The amount of marking and homework has to be done. Just the pure amount of face-to-face contact time with students, whether it's online or face-to-face. I mean, we had a whole 2 years of the pandemic, and that affected everyone and everything. And I also wrote a follow-up piece of research about how the pandemic itself, the global pandemic, has had affected the mental health of language teachers. And I always made a difference. I always tried to make a distinction between, say, a state school teacher in the UK and a language teacher that's teaching away from home, probably in another part of the world, away from family and friends, and sometimes insecure contracts. You don't know, when your next job's coming. I mean, Gerald has experienced this, I'm sure, with IH Barcelona in terms of the school deciding
Mhm.
for whatever reason, to suddenly close down or to sever people's contracts. And there's a lot of job insecurity that comes with EOT, as we know.
Mhm.
So that was a major factor. And also, the idea that a lot of language teachers we're real carers. We're like nurses in a way. We really care about our students learning. We're not with the job and going home. We really want our students, as Gerard said, in the interview, he really took an interest in caring about students learning, and he found a real love and a real inner motivation, intrinsic motivation, if you like, to teach, because he wanted to educate. He had a real interest in students actually learning something, and that's something I found when Gerard spoke at EOT Malta. Was a very inclusive person, a very sensitive person, and that's why I wanted to listen into your show today. And the final point on that is that I think a lot of language teachers they tend to be perfectionists. They want to get everything right, and nobody's perfect. I mean, we really must give up the idea of being perfect as teachers. But a lot of
Yeah.
language teachers in particular, they live to make everything absolutely right. And if the lessons doesn't go perfectly, then they tend to have what Sarah Mercer herself has called negativity, focusing on, Rachel Roberts as well, focusing on negative, the one thing that went wrong, not the nine things that went right in the classroom.
Yes, I think I agree with you. I think it's interesting and important for teachers to kind of strive to be better, to continually trying to be better, so long as it doesn't affect their mental health, of course. But I think one thing I think is true about teaching in general is that it's kind of, you're doomed to be imperfect, I think, because there's so many things you need to be aware of and keep an eye on in the classroom. So many factors, apart from the way that you teach, just the dynamics of the students that you're teaching, their needs. There's so much information that you're processing during a lesson that it's impossible to be perfect, I think.
Indeed. Yeah, and it's a constant battle. It's this thing of, yeah. I certainly I've been honest and open and frank about my own mental health struggles and the things that made me crash, and not be able to work because of issues to do with perfectionism, being worried about getting everything right. I mean, I always say I learned to embrace my imperfections over and that's done a lot. So accepting that you can't be perfect, it's gone a long way for me. Certainly in terms, I was just as I was listening to the interview with Gerard, I was going into my history and looking at things I've written about. And there was back in the day, there was an ELT Twitter chat about teaching diversity, inclusion, and social justice. So this is a slightly separate issue in terms of actual inclusion of the students, and different needs and differentiation and, special needs and all that kind of stuff that you were talking about, Gerard. The idea of inclusion as a topic, along with social justice issues in the classroom. And this was an ELT chat in November 2016, when
Wow.
Donald Trump had just been elected in the UK. So there was a lot of politics kind of was bubbling away. There's also the Brexit vote in the UK in 2016. It's quite a momentous year in terms of political change. And I think it was Marjorie Rosenberg who had suggested, she was the current IOTF president at that point, and she wanted to know, how can we discuss diversity, inclusivity, and social justice in the classroom in such, political times such as these? And that was quite an interesting discussion that was had on Twitter back in 2016. That was just something that popped into my head as a memory when I was listening to Gerard earlier.
When it comes to inclusion and well-being, etc., Phil, do you think things have changed for the better since 2016?
I don't know. It's a difficult.
You'd like to think
so. Well, I mean, the world is still in turmoil.
Yeah.
There's still, even this morning, I was contemplating and ruminating on just the number of conflicts that are going on in the world, especially in the Middle East at the moment, which is very, very sad.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult, hot topic. I mean, we talk about taboo and some parsnip subjects in the ELT. We have done for a long time. The things that you're not allowed to talk about, the things your course book writers are not allowed to say, because they're thinking of global markets and you can't be controversial. And by the time you've written something, it's history. It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always a thing. But I think the language classroom particularly has always had the potential, I feel, like a lot of many other people feel, that it's always has the potential to explore these issues because it's a relatively safe environment and you can make it inclusive. You can make a classroom, an ELT classroom, inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And a good teacher, and Gerald would know, being a Delta and Delta trainer, you know how to manage difficult and controversial subjects in the classroom. And if you're not going to do it in the classroom, in education, where else are you going to do it? You can do it down the pub. Not everyone does, of course. There's lots of countries
Yeah.
and religions that ban the drinking. So do you know what I mean? I think the language class has always been a place to explore these issues. If you've got to do it, you can do it somebody. So you've got to do it somewhere. So that's always been my point. And I've tried to do it myself in my teaching career. But in more recent years, I haven't been a language teacher, as you know. I've been
Mm-hmm.
a study skills teacher, and now I'm currently not working because of the diagnosis that I had. But yeah, it's I can't really answer that question with any authority whether it's changed, because other people will be in a better position because they currently still are language teachers where I'm not.
Of course. Phil, I'm going to have to bring things to a close.
Okay.
But it's been great to catch up with you, to talk. And if you'd like to talk at more length, I would be very happy to do so. Or feel free to drop in again in another week. It'd be great to really catch up. And great to actually be able to speak to you after so long as well. And take care. Thanks for joining us.
Bye then.
And so that brings us to the end of today's Sunday lunchtime show. Many thanks to today's special guest, Gerard McLaughlin, and to Phil Longwell for joining me at the end there. It was great to speak to you, Phil. And to all of you who joined us live, and to those of you who are listening back to the recording. So that's it from me. There are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listen in live or to the recordings, and I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.